All right, we're going to start in about 2 minutes. We're going to start in about 2 minutes. For those who are listening online, we'll be up on screen in about 2 minutes. Okay, everybody, we're gonna get started. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for those who are watching online for your patience as we get going. Welcome to the first in a series of events around recruitment training and retaining talent. I am Ross Nodorf. I'm the Executive Director of the Alliance for Digital Innovation. We work with about 30 member companies to advocate for bringing bringing technology into the government and knocking down all the barriers that prevent government workers from achieving their mission and utilizing technology to achieve their missions. So we concentrate on acquisition policy, cybersecurity policy, IT modernization, and then today is one of the pillars that we are working on from a policy perspective, and that's workforce. So we are very lucky today to be joined by a wonderful group of folks that we're going to hear from. But I will not be introducing those folks. We're going to turn it over first to our partner for this event from Workday, Vice President for Government, Chandler Morse.
Thanks, Ross. And I'd like to thank our speaker and our panelists, as well as our audience for participating today, both in person for those that are here and online. Workday's thrilled to be participating with the Alliance for Digital Innovation on this event to focus on both recruiting and retaining federal talent. These are issues that are key to supporting the federal mission and are driving policymakers' interest in modernizing the human capital management of the public sector. Even before I spent more than a decade in federal service, agencies have faced long hiring cycles, high turnover, and sought solutions for ensuring diversity at all levels of government. For years, agencies have had to manage through budget uncertainties and find ways to boost efficiency without sacrificing employee satisfaction. In recent months, I think we all can agree, the pandemic has shined an even brighter spotlight on these issues. These evolving challenges have occurred while the workforce is aging and government is facing even more difficulty in hiring younger employees. Nearly 2/3 of senior federal leaders will reach retirement by the end of 2023, and millennials and Gen Zers comprise less than 7% of the federal workforce. An average hiring time of almost 100 days, that's about twice the average of the private sector, I'm sure doesn't help. Frankly, the Biden administration has made strengthening and empowering the federal workforce the top priority of the president's management agenda. And with the government-wide cost of supporting legacy systems coming in at about $30 billion last year, there's also growing congressional interest in modernizing the federal government. There are additional steps that both the administration and Congress can take. One advantage the government has in seeking to retain and recruit top talent is its mission to serve the American people. In a recent OPM survey of federal employees, 3/4 of those surveyed said that their work gave them a sense of accomplishment when they went home. As a former federal employee and a longtime Capitol Hill staffer, I certainly can relate. Well, from the Capitol Hill side, it was not for the money that we were engaging in that. If the federal government's going to leverage that mission-driven opportunity and compete with the private sector, it's going to have to be able to integrate the mission into the workforce strategy while increasing flexibility, efficiency, and almost more importantly, career support. Unfortunately, federal hiring managers often lack the data for reporting and analytics tools that can help them understand their workforce and track and retain skills. A skills-based approach to employment is something Workday has spent a tremendous amount of time thinking about and trying to advance, both in the private sector and certainly there are opportunities in the federal. They lack the system that can assess retention risk, provide development opportunities, and support self-service. Missing such essential tools can impact both motivation and morale. And that morale, from my personal experience on Capitol Hill, which had high turnover, with hiring being an increasingly large part of your role, that morale affects both the workforce and the hiring managers. It's on both sides of that coin. Federal agencies realize they need to make investments in hiring and onboarding and talent development, as well as create an environment that helps enable career growth. Many are looking to establish thoughtful leadership practices and around diversity and inclusion, and as remote work evolves, federal agencies will be looking for better ways to assess engagement, productivity, and well-being, as well as maintain a supportive environment. With Congress looking to encourage federal IT modernization, there will have to be consideration of creative and thoughtful funding mechanisms that are going to go beyond boosting the Technology Modernization Fund. In addition, agencies should be encouraged to look at commercially available solutions rather than building their own. And lastly, with those perennial limitations on resources, congressional support for the shared services model can maximize the impact of federal dollars. As Workday enters the federal market, we believe modern and secure cloud-based systems are integral to achieving these agency priorities. Solutions that unify talent management, time and attendance, recruitment can let government agencies automate day-to-day personnel processes and give their workers more control through self-service options. When modern solutions that are tried and tested in the private sector offer dynamic and actionable insights into their talent, agency leaders can better focus on basic operations and responding to evolving workforce needs. In a future with complex challenges, a responsive government needs to be staffed with dedicated and skilled professionals. By equipping agencies with modern and accessible cloud solutions that enable strategic talent decisions, the U.S. government can create a workforce and a future that drives results for the benefits for all. Again, so pleased to be joining Ross and ADI. This is the first of a couple events we're going to do focused on this, and these are incredibly important issues at an incredibly important time. So with that, that's the end of the sponsor comments. And now we'll move into something slightly probably more interesting. It's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. Please help me in welcoming Pam Coleman. Pam is Associate Director for Performance and Personnel Management at the Office of Management and Budget. She was appointed to this role in 2021. She previously worked as Director of the State Personnel Office in New Mexico under Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, and on the Biden transition team as a member of the Homeland Security Department Agency Review Team. During the Obama administration, Pam served in several roles at the Presidential Personnel Office, including as the first Leadership Development Team Lead. With that, I'll turn it over to Pam.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Chandler. Thanks, Ross, for the introduction. So first, there's a lot of, you laid it out really well, the challenges that we have in front of us, and you also laid out an important piece of what part of our solution is, which is the federal career workforce, and without whom you wouldn't even be talking about many of these initiatives. about their commitment and their dedication and their passion. Because if we didn't think we had a chance, we wouldn't spend so much time talking about how we can help make it better for not only what we do to serve our mission, but how we can make it better for our federal, our colleagues, the civil servants who get up every day and are the reason that I came back into federal service. And I tell my team this, and I've said this to any career staff who's will be willing to listen to me, that I think that despite the constant over the last number of decades of not receiving necessarily the most respect for the work that is done at agency level, they still come to work every day. They come to work. I always like to say, like, you strap on a cape and they come to work no matter what. And they've done that through the pandemic, many of whom were on the front lines the entire time, many of their jobs would not allow them to telework or allow them to remote work. They were there meeting the needs of the American people during the time when we were all struggling mightily just to figure out, like, where are the kids going to go? How is it going to work? How? And those folks still went to work. So it's really my great pride and honor to be able to sit in my job and try to think about ways to make it a little bit better, thinking through process and products and ideas, and really the most, if not all, the ideas come from my fantastic team, and they come from their colleagues from across the administration. So for those of you in the room who are federal career civil servants, thank you, because no one's ever going to thank you enough, even if you hear it like 100 times a day. And for those of you who are here because you care about federal government, because that's the rest of you, thank you, because you want to make it better and you believe that there's a chance or you wouldn't be here in the first place. So I want to say thank you on the top to everybody. So what I'm going to talk about today is the President's Management Agenda that Chandler referred to. So it's really unique in a way that we can all remember the top three priorities, which is to strengthen and empower the federal workforce is priority number one. To make sure that we can deliver excellent and secure federal services is number two, and then managing the business of government to build back better is number three, and that's figuring out how do we maximize and leverage the tools at our disposal, whether that's acquisition or financial management. Channel referenced a little bit on the shared services side, but there's a lot that we do as a federal government. The first one, though, is strengthening and empowering the federal workforce, and that's intentional. It's intentional for it to be first, because it's the people are elemental to what we do. We own a lot of stuff. We have a lot of buildings. We own stuff and more stuff and more stuff, but really the people and the technology by which they do this stuff, and that's innovation that is like super sexy and interesting, and also just like a different way of looking at things. Like, that's the people doing that work. So that's why it's first. The PMA really comes out of President Biden's commitment to people in the first place. We released a vision last November, and you can find all this really cool stuff on performance.gov, the President's Management Agenda vision. And the values that this vision is grounded in are really simple. It's equity is number one. Dignity is number two. Results and accountability, that's 3 and 4. So those are what drive all of the elements within the PMA and are driving the elements of what you see being done in our administration. When we think about the really simple but powerful three-part approach, we're looking to build on lessons that have already been learned, right? We don't have to recreate the wheel. As I said, that when you ask a federal career employee for the good ideas and bad that have happened over the course of their career or even the course of the last few years, they'll tell you if you listen, if you ask them and you listen, then you'll see some of the ideas that have been circling around for a long time or have not gotten the light of day for a long time, or the places where we've all run into like a wall again and again and again. So this vision is not one document. I know a lot of folks are saying, well, when will you release the PMA? The PMA is a series of activities, a series of people doing things to release and doing them and trying them and doing them again. So we're going to change and grow as the work changes and grows, and we understand how to best deliver results based on what we are finding. And that's innovation, right? You do something, you try it, you look at it, you iterate, you come back to it, you do it again. You figure out a different way, you figure out a better way. So top leaders across the administration are all plugged in to this work, and they're committed to change, which is that the PMA teams who are working on this work are continuously involved and engaged and reporting up and reporting back and reporting with each other. So the PMC, who probably many of you understand what that is, but that's the President's Management Council. That's made up of the deputy secretaries across the administration. They have been intimately involved with the creation of this President's Management Agenda from the get-go. And that's really important because these deputy secretaries are the COOs of these agencies. They are really drilled down and dialed into the operation and the inner workings of their agencies, and they come together in this community of practice as a body, which is chaired by Jason Miller, our Deputy Director for Management, to think about and work on and chew up on the issues that they are confounding and have confounded people, but also that we're just addressing in this day and time because of the pandemic. So when we think about the data, to Chandler's point about how do we make sure that the PMA is getting the most out of what's happened before and what's going to happen moving forward, each of those areas, whether that's workforce or customer experience or leveraging the business, leveraging the levers, managing the business of government, they all have a lot of data outputs. And it's not like there's a lack of data, right? There's no, if you talk to folks who are at USDS or talk to people in the space of like really drill down into the heart and soul of where analytics live, they won't tell you like, oh, if only we had this data. Like we have the data. It's a question of how do we use the data and use it most effectively. In this case, we're talking about personnel data. And personnel data comes from a variety of sources, whether that's EHRI or the payroll suppliers, whether that's FEVs, which Chandler referred to as well. Like there's a lot of data. It's how do we best use that data. So when we talk about the strength of any organization, particularly a large federal agency or a small federal agency or anybody's agency, whether it's your company, your consulting firm, whatever, it really relies on the strength of its people. And technology, it could be super souped up and awesome, but it's only as good as the people who are using that technology. So the competition that we see for talent in the market, especially right now, is wicked fierce. This is the lowest unemployment rate is on record. And we have to see where our competitive advantage is. And it is about the service side, but you can't just rely on service and say, oh, just come and be, just come and put a cape on. You'll feel better about yourself. Like, we have to make sure that people have the resources at hand in order to do the work that they are committed and driven to do. So we have really, we've got challenges, and Chandler laid them out, and Ross laid them out. I guess I wouldn't say like we're looking for young people. We are looking for early career talent. Early career talent is really important because it's not just about people retiring, which is really important, or being retirement eligible, which is really important because that's data you need to pay attention to. But you have to figure out ways that you can have people who are in early career talent or folks who are looking at the tools in a different way than the way that I grew up and looked at what technology is. It's different than what my early career colleagues look at. It's different how they look at the opportunities that's presented by something that I might say as an older person, like, oh, I'm not sure we should, like, no, it's okay to take those risks when you've grown up in that, like the digital, you're a digital native. So while we know what our challenges are across the board, and they're really well documented all over the place, we also need to build on our strength, and I go back to my beginning of my remarks about the dedicated and talented federal civil servants, because they are the strength and a huge source of strength and huge sort of ideas. They are our most important asset, and the president has been really clear. And when the president says, I want the federal government to be a model employer, and that's coming from the President of the United States, not just your boss. It's coming from the President of the United States. That says something very different. It says that we don't just want to do our job well, we want to be a model employer, and we want to do our job well. So focusing on our workforce is the best way to improve how we deliver, because if we focus on our workforce, that's priority one, then we'll be able to deliver in a way that maximizes the workforce and the ability that we have to deliver on behalf of our mission. So that's why we've structured it in that way. So we've identified 4 strategies under workforce, under the priority area 1 on the PMA. So I'm just going to read them because they're really eloquently drawn by the people who put them together. And So one is attract and hire the most qualified employees who reflect the diversity of our country in the right roles across the federal government. That's really important. It's not just, let's talk about diversity, let's talk about DEIA, which is by itself critical for us to talk about and not shy away from, but to really talk about. But it's also about the right roles across the government, not just hire people, but hire people into the right roles for achieving the mission. The second is to make every federal job a good job, where all employees are engaged, supported, heard, and empowered with opportunities to learn, grow, join a union, have an effective voice in their workplaces through that union, and thrive throughout their careers. This is how you could just say shorthand and say, oh, that's employee engagement. But let's break it out and say, what does really employee engagement mean? What does it mean to have a good job? Like if you think about your jobs, if you're not in government, what makes your job a good job? Like it's not just how much you get paid, it's how do you feel when you go to work? And do you feel included and do you feel like you belong at your job? That's really important. The third is what we've all lived through. Like I say almost every day, like we're living in the future because it's the future of work is right now. So the third one is reimagine and build a roadmap to the future of federal work informed by lessons from the pandemic and nationwide workforce and workplace trends. And that's important because you think about it, no one has this figured out yet. That's just a fact of the matter. It's not like you look around and say, oh, what did the financial sector do? What did the consulting sector do? What did the Googles of the world do? What did everybody do? Did they figure it out yet? Everyone is still figuring it out in real time. And the president has said, I want to be a model employer. I want us to figure it out. I want us to be leaned in. So that's why the third strategy under this priority is about how do we incorporate these lessons learned, and how do we make sure that we are moving forward with the lessons and not saying, well, that happened, and then move on. Like, no, that happened, and let's see how we can incorporate it. And finally, the last is build the personnel system and support necessary and required to sustain the federal government as a model employer, able to effectively deliver on a broad range of agency missions. That's about the infrastructure, like personnel infrastructure. That's at OPM. That's how to make sure that they are as strong as they can be. And that's also when you look at the HR professionals throughout the administration who have it's been rough. And so their numbers are less than they should be. And that's in a lot of places, and it's for a lot of jobs. But in the HR world, if it's in human capital and your human capital is understaffed, you could have like the best and most wonderful intent and say, we're going to surge and hire. But if you don't have the people and the professionals to do that work's not going to get done. So being really intentional about the infrastructure of how personnel works and how workforce works, that's why it's on the list as well. So the teams are being developed along with action plans to address these areas. And right now, the first strategy is focused really heavily on internships and early career talent, as I said. We're coordinating with a lot of interested groups to better understand the current data, back to Chandler's point, and identify opportunities to increase the number of interns, to transition more interns to full-time employees, and to have more paid interns. And that's really important. So just that transition, I think that you can have interns, if you have a perfect system and you're an intern and you've had a really good experience in the federal government, it doesn't matter where you go work afterward, because now you are like an ambassador for the government. You're like, that was a really good job. So if you hear something in your future life, you're like, oh, no, I was there. I had that experience. I served. No, I get it. I see the people I served with. And it's also fantastic when you have a good system and you can say, I actually want a job. I'm an intern. I love it here, and I would like to get a job and convert. That's also a way for us to look at the internship experience. Career development and professional growth opportunities are very important in strategy too, as I said. Career pathing has changed in recent years, and the government needs to be able to support more of a matrix versus a ladder to retain talent and improve employee engagement. And this is something that I'm sure many of you have done in your careers. Like you're going forward. You're like, I got it blocked. I think if I jump out and get a different experience, I could come back to my company, or I could just figure out a way to get to where I want to go. We got to make it easier in the federal government for people to do that, so that they can either, one, jump out, get good experience, and come back, and not be penalized for it because they left and came back from a GS level, but also give people the opportunity inside the government, whether that's through, everyone's familiar with detail programs, but they're an imperfect lot, detail programs. So how do we make sure that we are more systematic about thinking through how people get from here in the beginning of their career to here where they want to be? Strategy 3, as I said, concerns the future of work, and that team is approaching that goal from the perspective of mission. How do we achieve our mission? Then the people, and then how does the technology and the space serve the mission and the people, not like out of order. They're considering all of these drivers as they map out future workforce and workplace trends. And then finally, strategy 4, as I said, focuses on transforming OPM capacity and capabilities to better serve federal agencies. And this team wants to modernize federal HR, and I think that's a real laudable goal, and build tools to support the data-driven workforce decisions to help the government become a model employer. So next steps for this team under Priority Area 1 is that they have set goal statements and success metrics, and they released them on performance.gov in April, which you can go to at any time. Even right now, you can see it. It's very nicely done. And right now, we're also looking to further coordinate teams and develop action plans so that we can lock in our work streams, our activities, our milestones, so you can all track them, and so we can effectively deliver results and see where the PMA can add value. So more updates are going to come out this summer, and we just encourage you to continue to look at performance.gov. So I'd like to highlight one of the ongoing efforts. This started in the past administration and continues today. It's seeing success across multiple agencies, and I'm sure many of you have heard about this, although the first time I read it, I was like, how can this thing be a thing? Because that's the worst acronym ever. But SMEQA, yeah, SMEQA, everyone knows SMEQA. Subject Matter Experts Qualification Assessment, but when I first read that, I'm like, how do you say this thing? So as part of our ongoing work to implement stronger assessments and hiring practices to identify qualified talent, and in alignment with our first strategy, we're continuing to scale SMEQA from pilot to routine practice. And assessment guidance just got released last week. You might have seen it. It's like OPM released it. It's a pretty big deal. This is this was a place where OPM and OMB worked together on this project for a long period of time. And so we celebrated together, OMB and OPM, on this release because it's not just about like one good idea. It's one good idea that was allowed to germinate over time and be embraced and thought about and worked on and hashed out until we got to a really good product on the other side. So using SMEQA, or subject matter expert-based assessments in partnership with human capital, allows agencies to not only identify talent with the skills needed, but provides a good applicant experience, because that's something we hear about all the time, and I'm sure you have heard about a lot, and if you've ever applied for a federal job, you can be like, yeah, everyone's shaking their head like, yep, I know that. It shouldn't be hard to apply for a job. Like, maybe it's hard to get a job. Like, it's fine. I have an interview and it didn't quite make it because it was a really rough and tough and stringent interview process. That's okay. But to not be able to get through a process easily is something that we're all taking a look at. And the applicant experience, if we're going to talk about customer experience and we're going to talk about employee experience, then we have to talk about applicant experience, because we need for folks to not be turned off because of an application process when they can apply for a job on any number of websites and have it in a heartbeat. So we have to be able to compete in that way. So we've worked with OPM, as I said, to successfully pilot this model. We've combined it with the idea of pooled hiring government-wide, and we've done that for data scientists, which was pretty cool, and customer experience strategists. And now we're working with agencies to run several more to hire technical talent, which is, I know, what you all are super interested in, which like product managers and UX designers over the next 6 months, with the idea of sharing those certificates once the agency who's hired their people then can continue sharing it across. So not only are these agencies using the high-quality SMEQA assessments, but they're committed to sharing these extra applicants with other agencies, and that's it's great. Like, it's not no one's being a ball hog here. It's not like saying, they're all mine and I'll save them for I'll put them in a drawer, and then maybe when I run out of those people, I can pull out my drawer and find them again. This is about how do we help the whole system by using a process that works and that we don't have to reinvent every time. So even beyond SMEQA, SMEQA, it's the best. Even beyond SMEQA, In response to the President's FY22 and FY23 budgets, agencies are also, and have done this, and are continuing to stand up talent teams so they have the bandwidth to focus on improved hiring outcomes by piloting even newer assessment approaches. So this multi-year commitment and assessment strategy is going to help us. This is going to be one way it helps us get the talent we need. There's no like magic bullet that says this one thing is going to be like, it's going to solve all our problems. Like, we have to look at this holistically and use the tools that we know work. Like, carpenter has a toolbox for a reason, because it's not everything a hammer. It's not everything a screwdriver. It's not everything. You have to have a group of tools and use them appropriately for the right job. So this work and the workforce efforts are all interconnected. We want to also, in this workforce priority, lift up other work and not do these things in silos. So the executive order on DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, came out last June. And when we think about what agencies have done, there's a government-wide plan, and agencies have then been directed to do their own agency plans. And if you think about what's happening in the priority one, like there's like, how do we make sure that our workforce represents America? Like, so we have the DEIA for the workforce, and how do we not like do these things separately but bring them together? It's not so easy to bring things together. The reason things are siloed is because it's hard to wrap your arms around everything and bring it together under one umbrella. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of commitment. And so this PMA and the teams who are working this PMA and leading this priority area especially know how important it is to like bring them all together and like be a little mama duck and like, oh, go back and bring them up again. It's really important to bring people to the table and keep them at the table. And when they start to fade is to get them back at the table so we can talk about doing this together and not letting these initiatives fall to the side. Some of you have also probably heard about the National Security Memorandum -3. That's also on workforce. And that's the 12 national security agencies and foreign policy agencies. So it's very easy to say, like, well, that's one track. Like, no, it's not one track, because they also are prioritizing, representing, and reflecting the diversity of America. Like, how do we get that in there? They're also really concerned about critical skills. How do we get them in there? They're also really concerned about making sure that we keep our employees engaged and not lose them to the private sector. How do we keep them in there? We want to make sure that all these initiatives are working in tandem and not in silos. I guess the last thing I'll say about that is that there's also, I'm sure this is another thing that you guys have heard about, is the Trusted Workforce 2.0 on personnel vetting and the personnel vetting reform that's happened over the course of the last number of years. And I remember just even when I came back in early 2021, and people were talking about, you know, personnel vetting, and vetting takes so long, and you're never going to get in, it takes 100 years. And it just so happens that part of our team has like personnel vetting reform. And so I'm like, well, I guess I should be briefed up on personnel vetting reform. And to see like the amazing progress that's been made, it's just like there's an urban legend, like it's terrible, terrible, terrible. And then you look at the data and you're like, actually, no, there's a process, there's a progress, and you can see the time shrink and shrink and shrink, and agencies climbing on board. And the agencies that have a hard time working together because there was intention around having people work together so we could lessen that time and we could make that like one less friction in the line, not just to hire people in, but that once you're in, to move from agency to agency without having to worry and wait inordinate periods of time. So feel really good about that work stream also that's referenced by name in the PMA vision. You're all very familiar with USDS, and there's the new digital core out of GSA, and there's the PIF program, and the Innovation Fellows, if you don't know. There's 18F. There's all these really great programs and projects, many of which grew up because it was hard to get in, like through the application process, et cetera. So it shouldn't just be that there are strategies that are just like, well, this part doesn't work, so we'll go sideways. It should be like, that's a really excellent tool. Let's use that tool when we need to. Let's make sure that the Title V straight-on merit system process works efficiently and effectively. And then when we have these needs, like USDS or Digital Core, because it's like fulfilling a specific need, let's really make sure we can maximize those. So the interconnectedness, just to say this little piece about workforce priority 1 and customer experience priority 2, that priority 2 also builds into engagement in priority 1, because the data all proves out that if your customers are having a better experience, the correlation between your customers having a better experience and your employees being more engaged, it's right there, because if I'm an employee going to work, just like the stat, and I feel like really engaged in my mission, I certainly feel really engaged in my mission when I know like the folks I'm serving on the ground are doing better. So the VA employee engagement numbers over time have demonstrably shown that that's the case, as trust, especially in the VA, has gone up. And also with TSA. So we're looking more at that data, and we'll be able to pull some of those data points out in the PMA. So I guess I'll say in conclusion that moving the needle on government-wide priorities, we think takes three things. One is to lead with our values, and if governing is values in action, then you lead with your values, and our values of equity, dignity, accountability, and results. That's the first thing. Keep it simple. Keep it simple, no matter what. But do three priorities. Can I talk about it? Can you talk about it? Can folks in the field talk about it? Can the big folks working on the strategy work on it? And can people who don't even know what the PMA say, like, oh, with workforce? Yeah, I get that. Yep, I get it. And serving the people? Yeah, that makes sense to me. And like we're a big government. We've got a lot of assets to like figure out how to move around. Oh, that makes sense. Like keep it simple. And then being clear about what success looks like. So that means addressing the challenges and the solutions to building a modern workforce. That means becoming a model employer. And our work has to continue while we keep core stakeholders engaged throughout the process. Because if we don't keep people involved and we're doing something like in isolation, how are we going to ever pressure test it? How are we ever going to know? Like we could just say, like, oh, we're doing a great job, great job, great job. But how do we know unless we're talk to people who we trust to give it to us straight? So that's really important, to talk to our stakeholders. I'm really proud of the PMA team who've been working on this. I'm really proud of our stakeholders who have engaged with us, the leadership within the federal government who really are dialed into this work and not see this as just like another exercise or another nice looking document. It's telling when you have leadership who asks the questions and ask the hard questions too. Like that's what you want from leadership. That's what leadership is doing right now. They're asking the hard questions. I'm really grateful for your interest in this work. I'm really grateful for your interest in workforce because that means you're interested in the people. And maybe it's the people using the stuff. It doesn't matter, because without the people using the technology is like we're going to live like the Jetsons and like live in outer space or something. Like we have to be able to work with ourselves and figure out the best way forward so that we can maximize the biggest asset we have, which are the humans that we all work with every day. So I just really appreciate the invitation so much. I appreciate the introduction. I'm sorry I won't be able to see my panelists, but now that I get a chance, I have now oriented them in time and space. And I just really want to say thank you, and thanks for your continued interest, and thanks for your continued questions on this topic and your engagement. Thanks.
So thank you, Director Coleman. I think we have time for a couple questions, right?
Yeah, I think
so.
so.
If you could just if you have a question, raise your hand, let us know what organization you're with, and here we go.
Hi, my name is Drew Friedman. I'm a reporter with Federal News Network. And my question, you mentioned SMEQA and also the OPM guidance that came out last week looking to improve hiring assessments. And I wanted to ask a little bit about, the guidance came out, but how can you have a continuous effort with agencies to help them just on a continuous basis learn how to improve their hiring processes?
That's such a good question. Thank you. So when I referenced inside the FY22 and FY23 budget, the talent teams, so when those talent teams first was conceived of by the folks who run the workforce branch on our team and in conjunction with folks in OPM, that what they did was meet with every single agency. So my team, and you're just sitting back to back there with Christy Daphnis, who runs the workforce branch, but she and her team met with every single CHICO, the Chief Human Capital Officer, and their teams across the entire administration, and had meaningful deep dives with them about what they have as resources, what they need, and how are they prioritizing when they think about recruitment or when they think about engagement. And so that is not like a one-hit conversation. That is an ongoing conversation. So when this guidance is released, whether it's OPM or whether it's OMB, the Chico Council, I'm happy to report, has reconstituted and meets on a monthly basis under the auspices of the Chico Council. But these are the kind of questions that and issues and programs that are discussed not only at the Chico Council, because that's like a one-hit, but also on a continuous basis with the agencies. And I'll say also that since Priority 1 is all about workforce, you've got, I'm sure you have done this already, but in performance.gov, if you look under the strategy leads for each of those areas, you'll see that they are career civil servants who are leading each of those work streams. And it's also a way that we're just like cross-pollinating ideas. And again, like this is a place where if you have the right people at the table who know it, like who've been around the block and know what they're talking about, and you introduce an idea that either it's too long a time coming or it's like exactly at the right time, those conversations are really fruitful. But I appreciate the question. Thanks.
Do you have time for one more?
One more, thank you.
All right. Anybody else? I'll get you next time, Jeff.
Sorry, Jeff.
Hey, thank you so much for your service, because we can't thank you enough. I'm Burton White. I'm CEO of Excel, and we're a tech consulting firm. And like a lot of people in this room, I'm sure are partners to the federal government from the private sector. And I wonder how important you think it is, the role of the private sector when we're working on contracts with feds to help those feds learn the best practices that we're bringing. In other words, getting some of the career development by virtue of kind of osmosis from the work that we're doing together. And depending on how important you think that is, I wonder if you think it can be encouraged more, say in procurements and other ways. He agrees.
So I guess acquisition not being my field of expertise, so I'm not. However, I will say that our colleagues within Office of Federal Procurement really are very dialed in and drilled into workforce issues, and particularly in the acquisition space, if we're going to speak about acquisition in that way. I think your question was broader, but I answer it because what they are doing, because that office within OMB, which is all about like how do we make sure we're managing the acquisition of the entire space as efficiently as possible, but also maximizing the people. I think that they were on board very early in the how do you make sure that the acquisition workforce is as up to date and engaged and not certified, but have the most tools at their disposal. So I think like those folks, if you're in the acquisition space, they are very well versed in how to think about the appropriate way to take what they're learning and then seeding it across. But I think is probably an inartful way of answering, but the acquisition space is a really strong workforce space. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for your time. We
Thank you.
really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.
If I could ask our panelists to take the stage, and we'll do introductions. So folks online, give us about 60 seconds to get set up, and then we'll go right into the panel. Okay, thank you guys. It's a good speech. So let's see if we can stick to some of the questions, but we've got some other stuff that we can chew on now after Director Coleman's comments. So again, by way of introduction, my name is Ross Nodorft. I'm the Executive Director of the Alliance for Digital Innovation. I'm going to let my panelists introduce themselves. We're very lucky to have a cross-section of folks with experience both today that's relevant to the conversation as well as previous experience that feeds directly into the conversation that we're having. So start with Toni, and we'll work down the line.
Sounds good. Hey, everyone. Good afternoon. My name's Toni Benson. I work at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, better known as CISA. You know, in the government, we love acronyms, so I will try not to acronym you to death today. Previous experience, I was in the United States Air Force, go Air Force, for several years, and then after that, I spent some time in the private sector. And then I found my way over to CISA, now it's CISA, but I found my way over there, and we're doing really great work in the critical infrastructure space, but primarily, and we'll talk a little bit, I'll probably talk about this a little bit more later on, I lead the cyber defense education and training team, and so that team is really focused on cybersecurity education and training, but also how that can be leveraged to help the workforce grow.
Great. Julie?
I gotta follow that. Hi, I'm Julie Meloni. I am the Senior Delivery Director and Technology Leader for Slalom Federal. Slalom is a global consulting company doing business strategy, technical transformation. That's 99% in the commercial space, and then there's this little group of us weirdos out in Tysons who partner with companies like Excella and try to help things work in the government. I've got about 27 years of experience as an engineer, and 20 of that was outside of the government. And then I got that itch and that bug, and it didn't let me go. Think you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. And I did 2 tours of duty with the U.S. Digital Service over the last 3 administrations, so I've seen a lot of shit. And I've seen a lot of really awesome stuff happen. Good stuff. Good stuff. And I'm looking forward to, I think we decided to be sassy today?
I think so.
Yes, we decided to be sassy today. Yeah, we're gonna talk about workforce.
That's great.
It's gonna be good. Sorry, Ross, we decided to be sassy.
No, makes my job a lot easier. Victoria?
Hey y'all, I'm Victoria Houed. So I started my career off as a software engineer and product manager at Cards Against Humanity. I'm helping them ship out all of their millions of games that they produce every year. I started a nonprofit for Black women in technology during my time there, which was basically just from a lot of the workforce issues that we experience within the tech industry itself, in terms of just diversity and bringing community together for diverse communities. I ended up getting interested in politics because a friend of mine ended up running for mayor of Chicago, and I worked on his tech team initially for his campaign, and then ended up getting into a lot of conversations around policy and how we can improve a lot of different policies in Chicago, it being the most corrupt city in America and where I'm from. And so I ended up joining a fellowship called Tech Congress, which brings in technologists into the government and Congress specifically. And so I ended up working for Speaker Pelosi for all of 2020, which was, as you all know, the most chaotic year in our recent history. And so ended up working on all of the COVID relief bills, privacy bills, disinformation, everything under the sun, worked on the antitrust report. And now I work for Schmidt Futures, which is a new philanthropy initiative started by Eric and Wendy Schmidt, the old CEO of Google. And I work on just consulting a lot of our grantees on how Congress even works and how to advocate for the things that you care about, because it is very different now than what we remember in Schoolhouse Rock days, as we were talking about earlier. So that's a little bit about me. Nice to meet y'all.
That's great. We're gonna stick with you for a second, Victoria. So tell us a little bit more about both Schmidt Futures and what it's doing, as well as Tech Congress.
Yeah, so I'll start with Tech Congress. So as I mentioned, we bring in technologists into Congress, and really it started because the person who started it was Travis Moore. He worked for Henry Waxman on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and during his time there, really just saw that there weren't enough technologists in the room when deciding a lot of the major decisions that the committee had to take on. And as many of you may know, the Energy and Commerce Committee is energy, consumer protections, it includes health. There are a lot of really difficult technology decisions that need to be made. And to be honest with you, during his time, I don't think there were really any technologists there. So he saw the need, filled the gap by creating this fellowship, and he's been scaling it ever since. And yeah, it's pretty amazing. And so Schmidt Futures is actually one of the funders, initial funders for Tech Congress. And so a lot of our grantees are related to bringing talent into the government. So we helped fund the Tech Talent Project. We've done Tech Congress, as I mentioned. We have funded this initiative called the Day One Project, which sits within the Federation of American Scientists, and they have like an innovation fellowship that helps places technologists into the government. And so we have like an entire facet of our funding that goes to tech initiatives.
That's great. Toni, so I know what you do because I've been in cybersecurity for a long time. I don't think people here fully get the scope of the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis as in regard to how you are helping secure our federal departments and agencies. Tell us a little bit more about CDET. Tell us what you're doing. Tell us who your customers are and what their mission is.
Yeah, on a day-to-day, I often forget how much stuff we're doing, right? I will say that I have the privilege to lead a very small but dynamic team that really is passionate about how we can really get and leverage training and education to help not only build and, enhance the federal workforce, but also how we can take that approach and apply it to the future workforce as well. So really looking at the next generation of workforce, what that looks like, how we can incorporate diversity, accessibility to information and training that we have, and really share that more broadly. I say our customers always are going to be first and foremost the federal government. We want to ensure that we are supplying the federal government with what they need to be successful, that we're looking at the gaps that we have maybe in the learning curve and how we can help do that. Now, we're not trying to go out and be some of the big name tech organizations that do training, right? We're really just looking at some of the niche things for the federal government. But in our mind, if we can train the federal government, we can also help train the next generation of workforce. And when I say next generation, I'm not just talking about the youth, even though I have a passion there. I'm talking about those that might be career changers, those that might have some kind of itch to scratch when it comes to cyber and want to be a part of the cyber workforce. So how can we take what we're building and how can we share that more broadly with audiences that otherwise may not have had those opportunities? So I say our customer base is broad, of course, first and foremost the federal government, but really we're really looking at ways how we can be innovative and be able to reach those audiences that otherwise wouldn't be reached or have those opportunities.
That's great. And I think we're going to come back to how your niche in the world is really helping to plug much needed holes. But I want to touch one briefly. Julie, you obviously, you're an ADI member, very active participant. We're grateful that you were able to sit on here. You also worked at USDS for a while. Help me understand a little bit about the different flavors of technologists and policymakers and acquisition professionals that are trying to help solve or ameliorate some of the workforce issues that we were discussing earlier. So 18F USDS.
The hard question for them, like, just explain everything. Okay. So here's the thing. When we hire people in at USDS, we always say we want to bring the best and the brightest and all that. Well, who doesn't want to bring the best and the brightest, right? But what we really look for is the ability to be empathetic and understand the pain points of everybody that's working in public service, because that's fundamentally what USDS and 18F and our other sort of Tech Congress and PIFs and all of those programs. When we bring folks in from the outside, it's yes to bring in that experience that is outside the public sector, but it's also to give people a more holistic view of how this stuff actually works, because the downstream effect of all this is, I'm getting there, don't you worry, is that it's not technology and it's not just public service, sort of career civil servant subject matter expertise. It's the blending of the two. And we don't have a lot of that on the outside, the knowledge of how the government works, but we know how technology works. And maybe on the inside, we don't have a lot of knowledge about, like, why is it important to have modern technical tools and processes? So the blending of the two together. And to that end, the types of people that come to USDS to try to solve these problems come from freaking everywhere. We are the ones that don't make it through the traditional hiring process. I can't make it through USA Jobs. I don't have a degree in computers. I have 3 degrees in English and 27 years in computers, and I can't qualify for a GS9 IT specialist position because I don't check those boxes correctly. And so when Pam talked about, sorry, Director Coleman, talked about bringing people in from the sort of the sideways in, the types of people that we're bringing in to help solve these problems are the reflection of the people that we're trying to serve, because we all contain multitudes and none of us look alike, act alike, work alike, think alike, or have the same problems. But the fact that we're all bringing each other together to fit in like puzzle pieces is why we're starting to see that traction and gain that traction and move forward in policy changes that lead to outcomes, technology changes that lead to policy changes that lead to outcomes, and so on and so forth. So there's your really roundabout answer to like, who comes and works for all this stuff? But at the end of the day, it's just people on the outside trying to come inside and help the people on the inside elevate their great ideas with sort of the thoughts and the processes that we know work outside, and then sort of take the hits for them and walk away.
Yeah, no, and I think that last part is important to note too, right? I mean, take some of the lumps as well.
Yeah.
So we've already dove into it a little bit, and Director Coleman did a good job of sketching out some of the gaps. But I want to really level set for the remainder of this panel. What are the big gaps that we're trying to plug right here, right? I think Toni represents one. You're talking about another. You know, Victoria's coming at it from a completely different angle. So talk to me about some of the gaps that we see from your particular lenses. And Victoria, if you don't mind, we'll start with you.
Sure, yeah. I mean, for me I'm the youngest one on the panel, / still very new and kind of learning. And I'm still very fresh on my, so I was very much trained in like systems thinking, and I feel like the way that I've seen a lot of these fellowships come about is through trying to address, like these different, like there's one person who identifies a problem, and then there's a gap, I guess you say, and then they create a fellowship to try and fill that particular gap. I think from my position, when I have friends who want to come and work in the government, I tell all of them to just do the fellowship route, because as Julie mentioned, USA jobs, like similarly, because I don't have a computer science degree, I have an engineering degree, that cuts me off from a handful of jobs, which is insane. I still have a computer science background. Technically, I worked as a software engineer. And so I'm like, there are so many barriers in all of the ways that traditionally have existed. And so now I feel like almost all of the gaps are because of this older system that has existed that has just not at all changed for the new engineering, software engineering, technologist background, which is, a lot of people have like English backgrounds, a lot of people come into it late. Boot camps are the most, like almost one of the most common ways now people come into being a technologist, and so none of the old system really accommodates for that, and so I almost feel like we're just going to continue to create more fellowships until the government actually adjusts to the current actual talent workforce. Can
I stick with you for a second, because I want to really press on the what is the gap that we're seeing in Congress right now from an understanding, because we're dealing with some very significant policy shifts right now.
Definitely.
Whether it's AI policy and how that affects the way that we provide services, go to war, protect our family, provide healthcare. There are technologies starting to underpin everything that we do from a policy and legal standpoint. So what do you see when you were in Congress, as you're dealing with Congress right now? Help me understand the gap from an understanding. Is there a gap? Is it narrowing? Talk to me a little bit more about that.
I think right now we're relying on technologists to come in and kind of save the day in terms of like dealing with a lot of these technical issues, but I think like we could be kind of meeting people in the middle from both angles. So bringing in more technologists, but creating way more education for the people who are just devoted to answering these problems. Like having people come in and just teach about AI, and there are people who are doing it, like the Wilson Center has great AI courses for staffers. But AI, like the classes they're often teaching is like, what is AI? What are like the implications long term? But there are so many things related to like cybersecurity that we have to answer. All of the things around crypto, Web3, like their emerging technologies is not really a topic really that people are teaching right now. And so I think the gap is bringing in more technologists, but then also meeting the policy staffers who are who've been there for 20 years and educating them and bringing them kind of to the next level. Because I think, and this was also like a partisan split that I had seen during my time in Congress, which is that it was a lot easier for it was a lot easier for the Democratic folks who were coming into Tech Congress to be put into an office and stay into an office, and then just Republicans, I think, kind of struggled a little bit more. And so I was like, how do we solve this problem? Honestly, we could just start teaching staffers who are longtime Republican staffers how software engineering works, how AI works, how cyber works, and just create that educational structure for people who, just for these different instances, I guess, of the gaps, yeah.
And that gap of, or how we're plugging the gap, I think is important, and I think it goes, Toni, to your mission, right? So talk to me about what you see as the gap in the federal space right now, current FTEs. How do we define what that gap is, and tell me how that plugs into the work you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a lot of gaps, but I think I will plus one on everything that Victoria said. I think one of the areas where we don't think about this long term is kind of in that mission support area. So Congress has a lot of great ideas, no shortage of great ideas, but if they are not funded, if there are not FTEs to be able to support those, they stay ideas, not programs, right? They don't become programs, they don't mature. And so we have to make sure that as we are looking at funding some of these from a standpoint of we want these to happen, we also have to have the people to make them happen. We have to have the support from leadership to make them to happen. You know, there has to be a whole cohesive line of like ensuring that this is going to come to reality. And I think sometimes the interest is there, but there's not always the people there to back that up. So I think that is one of the gaps that has to be looked at. On the flip side of that, operationally, there's always funding for those things, but those mission support things or those things that support operations sometimes get left behind. So I think the director was speaking earlier about, you know, you can't, well, maybe she didn't say it like this, so let me not paraphrase for her. But essentially, you can't put all this money into operations, but then don't have the people to work them, or you don't have the human capital specialists there to be able to actually process those people. So we have to think about those mission support elements as well to ensure they have what they need to get that effective pipelining going through. Some of the programs that we've really looked at, and last year we were fortunate enough to issue a grant to two organizations, one called NPower and one called Cyber Warrior. And those organizations are really looking at how we can bring talent in from underemployed communities, underrepresented communities in cyber, those that may, like I said, may not have access to some of those opportunities. And they're looking at it very holistically from a training aspect, then to an apprenticeship opportunity, to employment. And so back to talking about, you know, there's barriers there, though, if those people want to come to the federal government. Now, it was a cooperative agreement. It was a grant, so that means that it cannot be at the government can't be the sole beneficiary of that. And so we're really looking at how we can help cultivate, and it's not necessarily just to benefit the federal government, it's to benefit the whole ecosystem. So I just want to put that out there. We don't necessarily expect those people to come into government, but even if we wanted them to, and I know OPM is working on some of these things, there's barriers there. They don't necessarily have degrees, but they have the technical acumen to be able to come into and do the work. And so we really have to look at how we can make those things a little bit better. I know DHS is fortunate enough to have cyber talent management system coming on board, but even with that cyber talent management system that makes it a little bit easier, there weren't necessarily billets to support that initiative in the beginning. So it didn't come with billets is what I'm saying. It didn't come with, you know, here's some empty billets for you to be able to do this, from my understanding of it. So I think, again, holistically looking at the process, when you're looking at the gaps, you have to look at the mission support elements of it, and then you also have to look at the funding that goes with these great ideas.
Amen. We got it. We have to fund not just the work that you're doing to educate and retain and train talent, but also the billets to bring the people in at the same time. We have to make sure that we're focused on the funding. But Julie, I want to lose the thread on kind of the gap space, because I think you have another perspective to add, and that's around contracting, right? So Burton brought it up earlier.
Yep.
Talk to me about the gaps in the contracting space.
Remember when I said I was going to be sassy?
Come
Can
on.
I actually say something about what?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to continue the other train of thought first, but believe me, we're going to get the contracting. All of these programs are spectacular to bring people in. My greatest fear, and I've seen this from the inside, I've seen it from the outside, is that we are bringing in and doing a very good job at bringing early career folks in. There's no middle management layer there to support them. And I never thought I'd be the one being like, yeah, I need more middle managers. But we don't have, there's no one to mentor these folks once they get a year, 18 months, 2 years in.
Interesting.
It's grand sweeping generalization, but we need to not forget to, I don't even know who we is anymore, whatever.
Everyone.
We need to not forget that upskilling is necessary, or this workforce that we're bringing in is going to walk away because they're going to be bored, they're going to be unsupported, they're going to be disconnected from the mission, they're not going to know why they're there. And those 4 things are why people join in the first place. Money is not the reason, especially in the government. But if you lose that thread, if you lose that why am I here, and you don't see a future for yourself because the people that you're working with and for don't look like you, don't act like you, don't think like you, then why did we just spend 2 years bringing folks in through the Digital Corps, great program by the way, just to sort of disappoint them on the back end? And so I challenge folks in government to remember that, not to lose sight of the upskilling and the money that needs to be spent on upskilling the folks who do want to be upskilled, and there are plenty, and the reward system that needs to match that. Because there are also plenty of people in agencies who want to take that next step and want to reinvent themselves and still do their service to their mission, but they are at odds with what their hierarchy chain wants them to do. They can't do both things at once and still be successful. So this problem goes deep, but I don't want any of us to ever think that just bringing people in and getting them a good start is going to be enough. We're just going to hit the same cliff over and over and over again.
So let me before we go on, because I'm going to pressure on the contractor piece, because I do think that it's got to be a whole approach. But I do want to point out that Director Coleman did mention, and it was brief in passing, the idea of moving workforce around within organizations, within agencies, and how we are getting closer to having the ability to do that. I mean, is that something, Toni, that you've seen in action? Do you think it's something that we'll see in the not too distant future? I mean, especially from a cyber standpoint, people get bored, right? So how do we keep it fresh?
I agree. I think there's a couple of things. Well, one, let me say that and I'm not saying this because she's my director, but I really mean that I think Jen Easterly is like one of the best humans walking this earth, right? She really believes in her people and what that looks like, and that sense of belonging in the organization, and that sense of psychological safety in the organization. And so to your point, not just upskilling, but also bringing in a workforce, and then having a workforce that shows that level of representation. I will say that, she's my first, at the very top level, right? First female leader, right? I mean, I've been in this game for a while. I'm not gonna tell my age. I've been in this game for a while, right? I've been in this career for a while, and she is my first female, lead. That says a lot. I mean, at the end of the day, people can say what they want to say about representation, but being able to go into a room, a boardroom or wherever, you want to see someone that looks like you. There's a level of comfort that's there. And so I think that she is really adamant about ensuring that we build that at CISA. I will say, from a rotational standpoint and kind of what you were asking me about, that is something that we're looking at within the organization, because you don't want skill sets to get stale. You don't want people to get bored. But I will also say, within the federal government, something that we have to work on, and I think CISA is really looking at where our lane is in this, is how do you have that training apparatus in there to keep people trained? Not saying that the government has to build all their own training and all of that. I'm just saying that, just like in the military, people always say I compare everything to military, but just like in the military, you get boot camp, everyone's baseline. Then you go to your specialty school and you learn about that specialty craft. But it's a continual learning process, and that's something on the civilian federal side I haven't necessarily seen, and that's something that we have to think about and invest in.
We've touched on this a little bit, and Julie, I know we'll get back to contracting in a second.
No, I'm on the boot camp thing. I'm like, boot camps are good. They're good enough for the military, but they're not good enough for a workforce. So maybe that's a problem.
I want to. Director Coleman brought it up several times. We've heard it touched on here. I want to understand from each of your different perspectives the diversity, equity, inclusion, the executive order that came out. How is that being implemented from your perspective? That is the baseline question. Each of you have a unique perspective. So, Toni, you want to talk a little bit more about how you're seeing it from your lens, from an implementation standpoint? Go down.
Yeah, sure. I think from an implementation standpoint is that sort of what Director Coleman said again is that there's a bunch of silos of excellence, right? So how do we get our arms around what everyone is doing? Even within our agency, we've really looked at, like we have, I know within my part of the organization, we have an HBCU initiative where we're taking students from Title I schools, which are schools that are typically lower funding, lower income, and then being able to connect them with HBCUs, right? And so how can we take that now and now hire those people? And I think that it's like a continuum. You have to be able to help cultivate it at the early part, but then you have to be able to actually get them jobs when it's all said and done. It's not enough just to start an initiative, right? How does it feed all the way into the workforce? And to Julie's point, then how do we ensure that we have a path for them once they get there? And they have that belonging and that feeling of psychological safety. So I think from a diversity, inclusion, equity, accessibility, all of those things, we have to be intentional about it, and we can't just start all of these bunch of different programs and we're all tapping the same schools and we're all, but not having a coordinated effort to ensure that at the end of this, we're actually getting people into jobs, we're actually getting people opportunities, not internships, and then they go off into the ether and do something else. So where's that kind of continuum to ensure that we're starting early, in my opinion, as early as K-12. We've talked about Schoolhouse Rock. You know, where are some of those types of initiatives that at the end of the day, I said, if someone hears Smokey the Bear in the room, forest fires. If people hear DARE, good or bad, drugs. I'm telling you, when I fry an egg to this day, my brain on drugs. It's just those things that like
for cyber?
You can, right. What's the one for cyber? And I think we have to really be thinking about that as a community. What makes the most sense so that we can draw the interest of our youth in. Maybe it's TikTok. I don't know what it is, but how do we draw them in and how do we get them interested early and understand that they're using cyber every day, every time they're using TikTok, right? And so how do we get them in early to understand that and then build that continuum to get them actually into careers?
Julie.
No, I defer to you.
Yeah, I was
It's been
gonna
all
say,
chatting.
it's okay. No, I think visibility is like one of the most important things. I feel like every year I go back to Purdue and I just talk, like I talk to all of the industrial engineers and at the freshman levels, at the senior level, and just talk about how I use my industrial engineering degree and how I brought it to government and how systems thinking is like useful when people just are not very good at systems thinking a lot of the time to solve a lot of these problems. I feel I end up getting just a flood of emails of like, I didn't even know working for the government was an option. I didn't even know that like you could become even a software engineer after something like this. And so visibility, I feel like, is the first thing from the K-12 level at the university level. And then, as Julie mentioned, when people come here, they have no idea what options are at their disposal after they've done their tour of service for a year, after they've done Tech Congress. What are the options after that? Can they go into the administration? How do you even do that if not in USA Jobs? How do you even find out about all of the different things that are available to you? So I feel like visibility and just like giving people, the right people, resources, and yeah, as mentioned, just like the intention of it is incredibly important because right now we're just kind of, we're creating all these fellowships, but who are getting visibility into even the fellowships that are created? Like, it's a very small community. Who are getting visibility into the internships that sit within agencies right now? Usually it's just schools on the East Coast that are close to, DC. And nobody in the Midwest, nobody on the West Coast, for the most part, are really getting access to those things. And so we're really limited in terms of just the amount of people or the types of people that we're bringing into here. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, real quick on two executive orders, right? The Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Accessibility, and also the Customer Experience Executive Order. They work hand in hand because, look, our total addressable market is everybody, and we need to have a workforce that can serve everybody because our workforce looks like everybody. And honestly, when I was with USDS, every meeting room I walked into, it's like, oh, look, it's a bunch of, no offense, everybody, 50-year-old white men designing systems for single mothers to get benefits for their children. Like, no wonder nobody knows how to use anything, right? So, like, let's get the diversity of the folks creating the systems that people use. And that starts from just, making a change on who's on the team. making a change of who do you talk to when you're thinking about redeveloping a system. And both, if it takes 2 executive orders to elevate that problem we have of our teams of creators not looking like the people that we serve, then I'll take it. Thanks, President Biden. We'll take those executive orders. Forcing function is great. I'll take it. But then what happens next? What happens? I'm gonna swing this to contracting. You want to see how I'm gonna do this? What happens when? What happens when? My colleague at Excella will probably echo this. What happens when your rate cards are frozen for 5 years and you are all of a sudden in 2022 trying to pay people 2017 rates, which are very different, and you have to make the business decision to work into the negative on your contract? Like, we're not in the world of getting margin anymore. We're in the world of paying, sorry, Anti-Deficiency Act, paying to do this work to create outcomes, because we cannot hire people at the rates that we are frozen at. So we have to hire, I'm going to say sometimes, the bottom of the barrel, the people who don't make the cut in other places, the cheapest of the cheap. So we are stuck with making that decision to knowingly invest in junior people, raising them up, putting them in a place, and then how do we then walk away knowing we've done a good job? Like, the contracting world, the vendor world, has a different problem in the last couple of years than the federal workforce world. They're similar in that it all comes down to how do you keep good talent doing good work. It's not just a money thing. It is in this particular case where you literally are priced out of hiring that talent, but it's a refocusing the business on growing the juniors up, growing the green people up, and then having that support system. Because I know for Slalom, and this is actually true for USDS as well, which is why I joined Slalom, because my boss said, hey, you can do that over here. We want to make our customers better, we want to leave them better than we found them. We want to make sure that if we're bringing new stuff in, we want to empower those folks on the inside to not have to spend the premium to keep us there. We would rather walk away and have a better empowered federal workforce than keep taking taxpayer dollars. This is why I'm not in business, still an engineer, not in business. But I'm like, yeah, make the folks better, teach them about pipelines and continuous integration, it's great. And then we can walk away and go do something somewhere else. And they're like, but what about that revenue? I'm like, I don't care. But the point being is that now we're kind of out of people to even bring in, to leave behind for folks to learn from. So that those steps that we had made, that sort of public-private sector transformation there, those steps that we have made we're losing now because of the sort of rate cards being frozen for 5 years on whatever vehicle you're on, and so on and so forth. But the fact that you can walk down the streets, Facebook, and get $400,000 right out of school. I've never made $400,000 in my life, and I've been doing this for 27 years. And you're like, you've been doing this for 3 years and you can get $400,000? You should go do that. But then sock that all away and come work for the federal government, because it's really great. I mean, that's a hard conversation to have, but that's basically what we're saying we need to do.
Yeah. I want to bring up, and Victoria, you touched on this a little bit when you were talking about the making sure we're intentional about who we're reaching out to. Mm-hmm. What is the role in each of your specific areas that technology plays in helping us meet the mission, not just of diversity, equity, inclusion, but attracting the right talent, keeping the right talent? How are we leveraging technology, whether it's social media or the HCM tools that we have internally, or the training tools that we have, to really leverage, recruit, retrain talent?
To be honest, I don't think we're doing enough.
That's great.
Yeah. The way that I found Tech Congress was through a Slack group that I had randomly joined in Chicago on a whim. It was not through any sort of formal forum. It wasn't through a Facebook ad or something like that. Right now, the only source that I have seen for every fellowship that exists right now for technologists who want to join the government is on a Google Doc that I don't even know who made. And so right now, yeah, I feel like there are so many different, I think like putting resources in a central location for people who are just interested in this in general, from either policy perspective or wanting to build products within the government or joining digital service teams on a local level, all of these things are just all around the internet. There is no central location for any of that. And there also is not really a central like association or just group really that exists for people who are interested to meet people who are at all different types of levels in the government to learn from. So creating that mentorship, like once you're actually identifying the right people and wanting to bring them into some sort of like mentorship model for them to be able to actually see what they can become, like there is no central place for that either. And these are all things that the tech industry has kind of figured out on their own. Like they've built different communities for every different type of technologist. That just does not really exist within here. There are 1,010,000 newsletters that exist for that give you resources to all the different jobs that exist within a specific ecosystem of technology that does not exist here. So I think just like providing resources and like in a central location, online probably, putting it out to the right communities. I mean, we have all of the tools at our disposal, we just aren't really using them at all.
I will say that Code for America at one point did try to be a centralized hub for some of that, and there were a lot of reasons why I think mostly they got overwhelmed. I don't know all the ins and outs, but for some reason they couldn't keep it up. But that was that, and the sort of Code for America local brigades and state brigades was the closest we got for a while of having that centralized thing. But
Code for America brought in a lot of good people, by the way.
Yeah, Code for America is great.
It's great.
Go Code for America. But you're right, like all of this, and this goes sort of counter to that, homogeneous team creation, is that most of civic tech is personal networks.
Totally.
And our personal networks tend to look like us. So we are perpetuating the same thing that we're trying to avoid by working within our own homogeneous networks to get people to come work for it. So it's a whole thing. We need your help. We need everybody's help.
So, Toni, I want to go to you and talk about what you're doing from use of technology to help really kind of take your mission and amplify it. So tell me a little bit of how you do that.
Yeah, well, one thing that was said is that it can't just be the federal government, right? We all have to work together, right? If we want to kind of solve this workforce shortage or knowledge type of problem. So we don't leave it to just ourselves. We have partnerships with Girls Who Code. A lot of us volunteer with a lot of different organizations. Women's Society of Cyber Jitsu is one. Black Girls Hack. There's a lot of different organizations out there that I think can help and do help kind of getting the word out and training about how to get into cyber. I think from a standpoint of getting the word out within CISA, I see CISA doing a lot more social media. Again, I don't know who subscribes necessarily. I subscribe. Let me say that. I subscribe, people. But I don't know who else subscribes to CISA's page, right? So how do we did a campaign with Girls Who Code. Well, let's introduce those audiences to each other, right? So then that way we can show the amplification of women in the cybersecurity space, but we can also cross-pollinate our audiences. And now it's like, oh, you have a whole bunch of new followers. So I think that if we just think more along the lines of, and again, bring in people from different, whether it be ages or backgrounds who have these great ideas that some of us can't think of because I'm not on TikTok.
Same.
We have to kind of be looking at different ways to go about that. So I think our social media has gone, I said this our social media is great. I think I really do. I think it's, leaps and bounds better than what it used to be. And I think that we tried to be creative and figure out ways to ensure that we're reaching audiences that we wouldn't typically reach. And so I think that's one way of doing it.
Yeah. Absolutely. So look, we've got a few minutes left. I do want to open it up to the audience for questions. Mr. Powell, over here.
We can talk forever.
I'm Jeff Powell. I'm the CEO of Strongbridge and an Air Force veteran. Go Air Force. Thank you for your service.
Oh my God, same to you. Man, I'll be in the Air Force too.
So my question I was going to ask Director Coleman probably isn't appropriate for you guys, but I'm going to say it anyway, just as a statement, because it's a source of frustration, and then it'll lead to another question that I have for you guys. It's another source of frustration. Okay. So the first question was, as a service provider, technology service provider for the government, we're trying to place people into contracts with the federal government. So we recruit, finding the skills is one thing. Finding someone who will take the salary that we can offer is another thing. We find the person, and then guess what? There's the 1 to 3 month delay while you're waiting for the background check and clearance process to go through to get them on the job. They can't get a government email account. They can't get anything until that clearance process goes through, and we lose. I mean, it's probably close to half our candidates in that 1 to 3 month period, because we talk them into taking the job, they accept the job, we put the paperwork in, and that's 3 months they're looking for another job at that point. So that's been a real source of frustration for us. I was going to ask that to Director Coleman, probably not anything that you guys can address at this point.
I can say I feel you, man.
Yeah.
But this is a really good point, especially for small businesses, which the government is, highlighting with vehicles that are small business only. We're a large business. We can subsume that time. We can just hire them and keep them on the bench doing things. Small businesses can't do that, and that is fundamentally unfair.
And it's even worse when you're trying to transfer somebody from one agency to another.
We can just do
Each agency does their own background check.
Clearance
So you're stuck with the 1 to 3 month delay.
Yeah, is it like ADI doing something about like clearance reciprocity? Because let's get on that.
That's a big one.
Noted.
Noted, Russ.
Noted.
Okay, so now I'll move to the subject you guys were talking about. So here's another frustration for a small business, though. We'd love to bring in young people and train them, or someone changing careers and train them into a position. The frustration is that every labor category that's on a contract requires the same thing you were talking about with USA Jobs. You have a bachelor's degree or so many years of experience. We have Northern Virginia Community College right across the street from our office. Love to bring in those people. There's a cybersecurity program there. But we can't, because we can't qualify them for the labor categories on a contract. Larger companies will bring them in and put them on the bench and train them and get them some experience and then put them on contracts.
Or negotiate the labor categories.
Right. What I'd love to do, suggest, is some kind of internship program that a contractor like us could bring people into to serve the government, to get into a cybersecurity position with CISA that doesn't require those kind of years of experience, but we can bring them on the payroll and get them some of that experience. Just wondering if you've ever thought of anything like that coming from the outside, not just, I know you have internship programs, but anything coming from the outside in.
Well, I will say, even though we have internship programs, sometimes the connectivity all the way to the job isn't there. So that's something that I know internal to our agency we're looking at. I think Director Coleman's talked about it a little bit, though, that they're really OPM is really looking at how to refine these processes. Now, I don't work for OPM, and I don't know how long that takes, right? I know how long some things take to happen where I work. So I don't know how long it's going to take for those policies and things to really kick in, because it's one thing to write the policy, to operationalize it is a whole nother thing. But I think that's something that they're acutely aware of. I don't think that's a terrible idea. You heard it on the record today that maybe there should be some internship programs. I know there are programs where there's kind of swaps between industry and federal government, but maybe that's something that should be looked at as well. Are there internship opportunities to kind of get that experience? And like she said, at the end of the day, they become ambassadors. If they don't come work for the federal government, or they don't stay, with the federal contractor, maybe they become ambassadors of the work that is being done. So that's not a loss. So I agree with that.
Any other questions? Okay. I'll give you guys first of all, I'll say thank you very much for being on the panel. I want to give you each quick 10 seconds to say anything else that we've missed today, or any other recommendations you may have. We're capturing. Remember, this is part 1 of 2. 10 seconds, Julie.
You can go first, Julie.
Go. You're first.
I can't do anything in 10 seconds. I will just say, if you work in the federal government, always ask why. Usually somebody thinks there's a policy precluding doing the right thing or doing the innovative thing. There usually actually isn't a law, just a policy, and policies can be changed.
That's great. Victoria?
I think it would be putting pressure on leadership to prioritize these things is incredibly important, because when I think about, at least from the congressional perspective, right now they're going through a whole movement of starting this modernization committee, and on first the House side, now it's influencing the Senate side. And so that was sort of started from a lot of just like the leadership at the time in the House making modernization a priority, bringing technologists in, like trying to focus on optimization and improving a lot of these systems. But without that, without the executive orders, we would have really nothing and no movement. And so putting pressure on your leaders to be able to actually say, like, we need to be focusing on workforce, we need to be focusing on bringing in technical talent, and we need to be focused on modernizing a lot of these systems, I think is probably most important. And fixing USA jobs.
There you go.
That's taller.
Toni?
I think I'd say start early and often. We need to start a lot earlier. We can't just look at the workforce problems of today. We need to be thinking about tomorrow's problems. And so we need to start getting that awareness a lot earlier out there. I would also say that if you don't know who CISA is, CISA.gov is a great place to find out who we are. Young agency, but we're really growing and we're really doing some great things in cybersecurity. So it's a great place to work. And we have a dynamic leader, and I promise I'm not just saying this because she's my boss. Jen Easterly is amazing. And lastly, I would just say, when you get these people on board, please have a culture of psychological safety where these people can come as they are and they can feel empowered to have a voice. It doesn't always have to be the voices that have always been there. That's the whole point of hiring people, so you can get new voices and new ideas. That's it.
Jen Easterly is not my boss, and I think she's an amazing human being, too.
There you go. All right, thank you all to our panelists. We really appreciate you coming today. Remember, this is part 1 of 2. We're going to have another one on June 22nd, so please stay tuned for more information about that. And with that, I'd like to say thank you again.